Hello, everyone, and welcome to another War Table, this time for Marvel Crisis Protocol Survival of the Fittest during this 7th edition of Ministravaganza. It is. It's the 7th one. Wow. I don't understand.
No, don't worry about it.
It's fine.
Time flies by.
I know. Man. 7 of them, Josh. You were there
Lord.
for the very first.
Good Lord.
We're going to talk about this more later.
Oh
but for right now, we're going to be taking a look at the next big bad to hit Marvel Crisis Protocol tabletops, Apocalypse, the one and only, the first mutant. That's what he says. I mean, he and Namor have never agreed, but
it's true.
He does claim to be the first mutant.
He's the first one.
And who's going to argue with Apocalypse? Because let's be honest, he's a big, scary boy.
He's got a lot of A's on him.
He does. That's definitely a Marvel.
Brand appeal is important.
Brand. You got to brand yourself.
For sure.
Yeah. We are like A is first. Apocalypse. Here we go.
That's why he's the first mutant.
Exactly.
It's all coming together.
So over this next hour, as we're a little loopy from a long day of streaming, so it's just going to get more and more fun. We're going to be taking a look at all of the things it took to bring Apocalypse to the tabletop. We're going to be talking about the sculpting challenges of bringing the miniature to life. Josh is here to talk all about the art. We're going to show off all the cool stuff that went with that. We're going to talk about the design of the character. We're going to dive into his very unique mechanics when it comes to his Horseman and his new affiliation that he brings with his leadership. And we're even going to go into a bunch of different play modes with him, including an ultimate encounter. And we're going to talk a little bit about how that functions and what you can expect to bring that to the table if that's a game mode that you decide to partake in to really face down a true, terrifying Apocalypse and his Horseman.
Excited.
It's so exciting. So, of course, just to start things off, there were numerous challenges when approaching this character. And one of the big things about why it has taken so long to see Apocalypse kind of make his entrance into the game was you have to tackle a lot. Apocalypse, super powerful character. Josh, give us the rundown of the challenges of Apocalypse from a story to a tabletop perspective.
I mean, he is one of the most powerful mutants and maybe characters in the Marvel universe, right? And he's had his hand in many pies. He's had many storylines that affected many other characters and many just have waves across Marvel and the X-Men, right? So we knew we had to obviously do right by him in terms of power level, in terms of theme, and also the notion that in a lot of ways, he's one of those characters that can almost do everything if you go through the comics. So you got to figure out what are you going to focus on, right? What is our Marvel Crisis Protocol version of Apocalypse? What is he going to focus on and what is he going to do? And then obviously just doing things like, how are we going to do, the sculpting for the miniature? How many options are we going to do? He's got very specific levels of terrain he usually comes with in the comics. Do we represent that? There's a lot of planning, a lot of back and forth. Do we do Age of Apocalypse? Do we do regular one?
I think that was the biggest debate, right? Yeah. When we initially started, we said Apocalypse is on the schedule. There was definitely there were 2 tracks, right? There was Age of Apocalypse, and you go with that look and you go with that storyline, or there was just Apocalypse in the modern times, right? The non-Age of Apocalypse, the one that we see throughout different media fighting the X-Men, or even it was represented in Powers and House of X with the recent arc that just ended. And discussing it, I think where we landed was if we were going to do Age of Apocalypse, it had to be more than just Apocalypse himself. We needed to do all the characters with it, a whole kind of launch around it. And so we decided to put that one off and maybe come back to it someday. Instead, just get Apocalypse into the game in a way that fit with all of the pantheon of characters we had. So this is definitely a modern Apocalypse.
Yes.
And as you mentioned, of course, one of the big things is after we had nailed down what the look of Apocalypse would be, we just started talking about sculpting and the miniatures design, and we knew from the start the design was going to feature his biomorphic arsenal, right? The fact that he can modify and change his shape at will, he can grow big and get small, and he can also create some pretty badass weapons.
Exactly.
So with that in mind, we of course had some options in there. I think we have a slide of the miniature. So here he is. Look at this. This was the dream. This was the vision that became reality. With him facing down the X-Men on his rejuvenation chamber terrain. Just came out incredibly. The one and only Marco of AMG fame,
and his whole team just destroyed it.
Took it all on and did Apocalypse himself, and he claimed that now he's hung up the gloves.
Yeah.
This is the last
This is
Marco
his
special.
retirement, yeah.
This was his retirement miniature.
Yeah.
Marco, if you are unaware, he did Doctor Strange. He did Venom.
Yeah.
He did Thanos.
Yeah.
So Marco has always come in and kind of in his position, his role at AMG, he's been able to cherry pick the best, the best projects,
and most challenging ones.
And
Sometimes
he takes them on for sure.
Yeah.
And so we were really thrilled to see him like move through on this. But he did do a couple of alternate arm options. So the one we've shown has, of course, been the monologuing villain hands, but you also get the cool buzzsaw arm or the biomorphic blaster. And so you can mix and match those however you want to create the apocalypse of your dreams.
That's right.
And represent some of his different abilities on the miniature itself. Let's go ahead and I want to take a minute. You mentioned, Josh, it's not just Apocalypse. We also want to create the world around Apocalypse.
Of course.
And so designing an entire kind of themed set of terrain so that players who wanted to kind of showcase the rise of Apocalypse, merging into the age of Apocalypse that we haven't quite gotten yet. We did a number of different terrain pieces. We started kind of conservatively, and then you kept adding ideas. You kept throwing out stuff.
Shout out Dallas Kemp.
Dallas Kemp kept adding things.
You madman. It was one sheet originally. I swear to you. I swear to you. That was literally only one or two pieces originally. But then,
Apocalypse table was beautiful.
We got very excited, and we all loved it. We had to do a love letter, so it exploded a little bit.
So what was supposed to be one terrain offering that was relatively compact became 3 terrain offerings.
Yep.
And not only did it grow from when we initially started concepting it, when you, Dallas, and the rest of the art team were kind of working on it, but then it got handed off to the sculptors, and our sculpting team and engineering team, especially Evan Kang.
They were cooking.
They fell in love with the design and the aesthetic, and all of a sudden it was like, this thing's supposed to be this big, and then all of a sudden it was 3 times that size. And so we really had to start talking about, okay, all of this stuff is amazing, but what is that going to mean, and how are we going to put this together? And in the end, we created 3 terrain sets that if you put them all together, you create one heck of an Age of Apocalypse style table. Let's look at the shrine first. So I think we've shown this one off before at the roadmap, but here it is in all its glory. Just a fantastic blend of Egyptian and dark, monastery kind of stuff, future tech.
With, celestial
really
tech.
Weird celestial tech kind of idea.
And very fun to play on.
Very fun to play on. Yeah, you got obelisks. Even some of those treasure things might come into play.
You have treasure chests as well. Yeah,
I
think those actually get used maybe in the Ultimate Encounter.
Yeah, they actually get used.
So there's this one. Then there's the set dressing one, which has the dark future obelisks. It's got the little flame pins, some who knows sci-fi tubing.
We were at the point where we had to be careful what we said because it might have ended up on the thing.
It's true.
At one point someone said man, Apocalypse transforms people. What if he had chambers where he was and then we didn't hear anything and then they were just made. Somebody just
all
made
of a sudden,
these regeneration tanks.
Yeah, these little regeneration tank things for Horseman came out, and Evan's like, well, I did these, and we were like, yeah, sure, why not?
Let's do it.
Why not? Just incredible overall pieces. And of course, the piece de resistance, the centerpiece for it all.
Yes.
The keystone, the rejuvenation chamber. So anyone who knows anything about Apocalypse knows that the way he's been able to sustain forever is that he has the celestial tech that rejuvenates him and adds powers to him and brings stuff back. And so we had to represent that in terrain. And this is only a part of the final piece because you saw the full thing. One of the really fun things was that we were able to integrate Apocalypse into it. So if you do wind up picking up both Apocalypse and getting the rejuvenation chamber, you can of course display Apocalypse on the rejuvenation chamber when you're not using them in the game. So it's just a fun little way. We love to take opportunities to integrate, thinking about miniatures on the shelf as well as on the tabletop, right?
He's got sarcophagus. It's a sarcophagus. Look how awesome that is.
It is.
Oh my
God.
God.
When you're not playing the game, you want to be able to look on your shelf and be like, oh yeah, that's really cool. How do we create these little elements?
Oh yes.
And we're going to talk more about the rejuvenation chamber because it is really important to the Ultimate Encounter.
Right.
Yeah. But that kind of brings us to the overall, so now we've taken a view of everything that's there. We're going to dive into the actual artwork and design, and Josh, just start walking us through the whole process of what happened, how you worked with these fine developer friends to figure out the art, And then we'll talk a little bit more,
Yeah.
not in this panel actually, but in tomorrow's panel. We're going to talk a little deep dive into how that art got turned into Team Tactic cards.
Exactly, right? The secrets behind Team Tactic card creation. Yeah, I mean, this was a big project, and this was we loved the character. We had to do a love letter to him, so we sat down and we figured out, okay, what are the story beats we have to hit? It became a little easier when we decided if we were going to do Age of Apocalypse or not, because we're like, oh, okay, so like about 45% of that's, we can just table that for now. So we're like, okay, well, what do we have to do? We have to deal with some of his ancient history, his sort of philosophy on survival of the fittest, his many interactions with the X-Men, including some very specific ones, and just generally get that idea of grandiosity and just like bigger than life energy that we had to feel for Apocalypse. And so we went to our best of our best artists, and they pushed, and they gave us some of the best art we had seen up to the date, honestly.
So we can take a look at the character art first.
Oh. Yes, this is by Patrick Brown, who's, if anyone's paying attention, does a lot of our art from now on, and he loved this character so much. This is the character art. We never asked for backgrounds, but he volunteered to just do it. And I think at that point, the sculpting for the tree was like half finished. We had a little bit. Like, he ended up asking if we had anything, and we were to send him a few pieces. But he also looked at like the comics and stuff, and yeah, did a really great job. And then I remember Marco going and actually asking for this image to look at to refine the sculpt. So this is really one of the great moments of the art, having able to reflect on the sculpt and back and forth and vice versa. Some of the tubing on like the biceps and on the legs that were in the art got added to the sculpt later on, and that really added that extra texture and dimension to it. Yeah. So yeah, we're really proud of that piece. And the background is not on the stack card, but you'll see it placed in different places.
It will be used.
It will be used. It will be used.
I think we have next look at the 3 Team Tactic cards that are going to come with this fine man.
That's right.
The first one.
This is the first one. This
literally named the first one.
Oh, yeah. And this is the first one. Yeah. And fans of Apocalypse will know that this is an homage to X-Men Rise of Apocalypse, 1996 by Adam Polina, which is one of the most iconic and Sabbath Noir covers. This is young Apocalypse when he was still young and had long, luxurious hair, and
I miss it.
Yeah, just building his empire slowly. So we want to get that feeling of sort of he's wandering in the desert, building his power, building the cults that would worship him eventually, and in the ancient, and sort of make it feel like timeless, like the sort of the sands of time. And of course,
so lonely.
Exactly, and to really push that, Ben, billowing capes and billowing cloaks, like that's the key to making things feel, lonely, is billowing capes and
trapped in the wind, all alone.
Big anime opening vibes,
Oh, sure.
You can hear the music in this one.
You could feel
sure.
it, yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to the next art piece we have to show.
So yeah, this is what were we in?
Mortal Servants.
Mortal Servants, and of course, if you know, this is by Chanley Pui, who is one of our amazing artists. And so if you know about Apocalypse, he has 2 main sort of servants, even though they wouldn't, one of them would not consider himself a servant, but whatever, Mr. Sinister and Ozymandias. And they sort of represent 2 aspects thematically with Apocalypse. One is like the technology and sort of the gene splicing, the super science. And then Ozymandias represents the mystical aspect of Apocalypse. Ozymandias can see into the future. He sort of serves like a court like wizard to Apocalypse. A vizier, exactly, and it gives him, and he sculpts things that he sees in the future, but of course they're not always accurate. And so, we made this card, and I think by the end it sort of, the rules really showed that theme of that balance, right, between, the different aspects of Apocalypse and how he will do, use any tool at his disposal to
Speaking of any tool at his disposal, when fools come to call, this next art piece kind of shows what happens.
Yeah,
Indeed.
Sometimes
that's the noise.
Sometimes you just got to show what happens when you mess with Apocalypse, right? And the reality is Apocalypse is in the comics, he's more than capable of taking care of himself against many powerful X-Men and X-Men, elite X-Men heroes. I think we're able at this point to recreate that on the table for the most part with all the characters that are out, right?
All those are in the game.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that is, yeah, look at that. And that's like we planned it almost.
Almost like you planned
Almost
it.
planned it. But yeah, so, and we want it, of course, because Apocalypse can change his size. We made them bigger than normal and to get that sort of grandiose, big feel. And sort of getting the feeling that like he might win this one. This fight is probably in the bag for him a little bit.
This is mid in the arc where Apocalypse is ascendant before they figure out how to take him down.
Exactly. Exactly.
And then there was that's the team tactic card art, but there was a big component of Apocalypse, which we're going to talk a lot about as we get into the character rules and design. We're going to show off the art first here, and that is the idea that Apocalypse can bring his Horsemen into the game. And of course, you can't think of Apocalypse without his Four Horsemen. And so you were challenged to create one piece of art that could be broken into 4 different cards to use for this. So talk about this beautiful mural that's going to go on the side of your van.
This was a challenge. This was we knew. I mean, if you know Apocalypse, he has his Four Horsemen, but he's had many iterations of them. There's many people that can call themselves Horsemen. So we decided to go with sort of the 3 oldest, like one of the oldest, and some of the most memorable ones that we could get, right? So this obviously isn't all versions of them, but these are the ones that we felt like had the biggest, hard-hitting one, or the ones that we knew were former X-Men that got tragically turned to Horsemen. This was done by the great Scott Cohn, who just like nailed it, and this was probably the most ambitious piece we had worked on up until then, like trying to figure out how to make it compositionally work as one thing, but still have it read as an individual card, was challenging to say the least. And I definitely lost some hair follicles and some sleep trying to make this one work. But we got it, and it's beautiful, and we're really proud of it.
Which character's your favorite?
So
not Archangel.
So everyone knows that the deaths and the wars are probably going to be everyone's favorite, but getting Pestilence down and adding the hint that Polaris, people don't realize that the big armored person behind Caliban is actually Polaris. Spoiler alert. That one felt like a really nice little deep dive for people. So yeah, that's probably my favorite one.
Nice. All right, so we've seen the art, we've seen the sculpt. Let's talk about how we pull all this stuff in to actually make character rules for the game. So I did the original design for Apocalypse and everything else. My big notes that I handed over to Dev, the problems that I gave them to figure out were the Horsemen had to be upgrade cards that went on characters that allowed you to turn them into his Horsemen, and that was going to be tied to the leadership. And effectively, those Horseman cards had to give them additional abilities that tied back into the themes of the Horsemen themselves. And then the other one was that Apocalypse had to really represent his biomorphic abilities and the idea of survival of the fittest and evolution. The card that you see before you is a much tamer version than what I handed over for sure. But that's the fun part about doing the initial design, is that you get to dream big, knowing that somebody will force it into fitting within the rest of it. And I have to say, like overall, as Ben's going to talk about the changes and the iterations, and I'm sure Pagani will have some thoughts as well, you guys did a great job of taking those big dreams and turning them into something that has made a really unique character, and I think really captures the Apocalypse that we were aiming to get out of this, which is the iconic Apocalypse that always goes up against the X-Men.
So yeah, Apocalypse getting good ways to survive is kind of what I want to concentrate on here. And let's take a look at Only the Strong Remain, which is anytime that he gets damaged, he gets to heal back 1, and then whenever he would get a special condition that he's immune to, he either gains a power or removes the damage from himself.
That's amazing! Oh my god.
So anytime he gets challenged or anytime he gets hit, he comes back stronger, right? He comes back healed.
He's learning, right?
Yeah.
Right.
He's not only learning, but he's evolving and recovering.
So he has a good set of immunities here, and then on the injured side, he gets immunity to everything, all special conditions, which makes him so that he's really a survivor, right? That this character, very hard to bring down. So his biomorphic arsenal kind of
you're going to notice a special condition theme throughout this character.
Absolutely.
Right?
That immunity to special conditions, and his a way to shift his offense and change other people is represented all over the card. So in Biomorphic Arsenal, he can hand out conditions. He can change himself to change the type of the attack. You will be remade through me whenever someone is getting a condition they already have. He can change it to a different condition. Oh man! Right. And in Summoner's Judgment, he can take morph somebody. So whenever they've been morphed enough, he can judge them as too weak, and just basically roll 12, 14 dice against characters just to put them out of their misery.
For 3 power. It's so good.
I don't think I saw the final version of this guy, so I'm kind of freaking out. I was like, oh my god, Mystic. He doesn't have any Mystic attacks. He absolutely's got, he can do everything. Yeah. It's incredible. Oh
He's biomorphic.
This is amazing.
He's biomorphic.
So yeah, the other element is the celestial technology that he incorporates into his horseman and he uses. He's able to use a very powerful place ability. I mean, this can rearrange the board. So I'm excited to see what people do with this.
Celestial technology was definitely one of those. I think that was a you idea, right? You wanted, after some initial playtesting, you're like, he doesn't really have any board manipulation, and how do we kind of work through this? And as I recall, you kind of pushed a couple of different elements that were pretty wild.
Yeah, we tried a lot of things with celestial technology, right? And we've seen through Thanos and a lot of these other high threat characters that the ability to move characters around the table is very important and very powerful to how they play. So this is a very different superpower than exists anywhere else, right?
Right. It's got a power phase, reactive trigger. It does something that's really, really powerful. I mean, he can move characters 13, 14 inches with this. 2 characters.
2 characters, 13, 14 inches, and it's
as it should be.
And it's.
But the limiter is they wind up next to
right?
him.
Like it's this
it
weird,
pulls them out of danger.
And we'll see a little bit more when we get into the Horseman cards about how he wants to synergize with his Horseman, because it would have been awful if he didn't. But it's this. A lot of the placements in the game are about placing forward, grabbing tokens, placing forward, attacking, doing these kind of things. This is a very defensive place, a very sort of reconsolidate power place. And then, of course, you also drop all your tokens, because we've learned a lot of lessons as time has gone on. So
for sure.
Celestial technology, I think, is my I love basically everything on this card, but I think celestial technology is my favorite because it's the weirdest.
Yeah,
I guess,
more
right?
most
I mean,
most
made
abnormal.
through me is weird as hell as well.
Sure.
We got some. Apocalypse is doing some strange things. We've got, but he wouldn't. He's barely understandable here because his leadership has so many more elements.
It's got a whole other card that explains all the rules for the leadership.
And obviously, one of the big things with Apocalypse, right, is that you can obviously splash him into different affiliations. You can have him come along, and he is a pretty powerful 6th threat in his own right.
Yeah.
But the reality is that where he shines the most, and this was also part of the design philosophy of him, is that this is Apocalypse in the lead. He doesn't take orders, he gives orders. And so you're really rewarded, as you're going to see, from taking him as the leader of the Servants of Apocalypse and unlocking those horsemen. So let's go ahead and dive in to the biggest challenge overall for Marvel Crisis Protocol in general. That's what I'm going to say at this point.
I think it's fair.
I think making the entire game was easier than actually making this whole system work in a way that just didn't either wind up being
I don't know about that one,
completely useless or blow out the game. So let's take a look at the first part of the Horseman card, which is that he himself gains Master of the Horseman. So walk us through this card.
So Master of the Horseman, he gains that, and this is essentially the structure of his leadership. So he gets Master of the Horseman, which lets him use the active superpowers on the other Horseman cards that you're assigning to the rest of the squad.
Which we'll get to in a moment.
And Master of the Horseman uses an evolution token mechanic economy, where it generates evolution token one per round, and the other cards generate the other evolution tokens, and then he and the Horseman can spend those evolution tokens for rerolls or to use those active superpowers that are on each of the cards.
So it's like a second resource inside of the game, aside from power, but can also stand in for power sometimes.
Right, yes.
But only sometimes. Very important, because otherwise things get wacky.
You want to talk a little bit about how we landed on this in terms of, as you're going to see in the Horseman cards, each Horseman card gives you a couple of new superpowers, one of which typically costs power.
Yeah.
And why the evolution tokens became kind of a stand-in alternate for power that you can use for those abilities.
Yeah, I can tackle this one. When we started adding superpowers to characters, right? Characters are designed to do what characters are designed to do.
Yes.
So they have, in theory, if we've done a good job, they generate enough power to do some of their stuff, but not all of it, is usually what we're aiming for.
Right.
And then they have to make choices. When we then add in another superpower onto that says, hey, use this, a lot of characters just stop functioning, or they just don't use the superpower,
Yeah,
right?
they would stop using one of the superpowers. Yeah.
So either they stop doing what they're supposed to be doing, or they stop doing what the Horseman card is letting them do, both of which are, in my opinion, unacceptable. We can't have that, right? Like, we're making this card, we're making this incredibly powerful and cool leadership. We want to use that, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the point of this.
So I think the Horseman card will help.
Yes, let's pull up the first
illustrate
Horseman
those,
card so we can talk about it. So the evolution tokens can be spent instead of power for these superpowers. You can also spend power. We ran into a situation where when it was just evolution tokens for these powers, you only gained a couple evolution tokens a turn, so nobody could really use the superpowers,
Right.
so there wasn't enough. And when we had
could stall
only
out,
power,
for sure.
you could definitely stall out. When we had only power, same thing. We already talked about that.
Right.
Characters can't do what they're supposed to do if they have to spend additional power that isn't sort of built into their initial design and that kind of stuff. So by creating sort of a split resource that can be used as power for these, but also for rerolls, you always have something to spend the evolution tokens on. Rerolls, they're great. Everybody always wants them. But if you're out of power, you can then use them for these superpowers, which then lets you do all sorts of cool stuff. So each one of these Horseman cards is going to have an innate that has some way to generate evolution tokens, and then an active for some way to spend evolution tokens or power.
And generally, what you're spending the evolution tokens, the active powers, really help you do fuel the evolution tokens from the innate power. So with Horsemen of War, Fury is a way to get extra damage, to change die results to hit for each crit and wild in the attack roll. And Horseman of War gives you evolution tokens whenever you deal damage.
Yep. So it's a fighter, right? Get in there,
Right.
fight. That's what they
So
wanna do.
Horseman of War also gives you evolution tokens whenever you take damage. So Fury has a range 2. So it's just like War is just extremely aggressive, gets in your face,
Right.
Gets punches, and rewards you for doing it.
I think it is worth mentioning before everybody freaks out. These Horseman card can only be assigned to specific characters. The affiliation for Servants of Apocalypse lists characters, and it lists which of those characters can have each of these Horseman cards. You can't just put this on everybody, because that gets wild, basically.
Various mutants, and the affiliation list lists which Horseman cards they can take. Each character has 2 options.
Yep. So before we go any further, let's just...
All right, well,
calm
let's
everybody.
take a look at the next Horseman and see how it changes from War to Pestilence.
So Pestilence plays into Apocalypse's condition game, and if you look at Horseman and Pestilence, whenever you give a special condition, whenever enemy characters gain a special condition during the Horseman of Pestilence's turn, you generate evolution tokens at the end of that activation. And Consuming Blight lets you do that by each character within range 2 gets a special condition, right? So that's just a very simple AoE. Put out the conditions, and then depending on which character you chose, you have other options for putting out special conditions. So Pestilence can generate a lot of special conditions, and also enables Apocalypse to use his "You'll Be Remade Through Me" and his Insomnia's Judgment, and really plays into that condition game.
Yep. And it also applies Root for Cower Before Me.
Yeah.
Which only his normal attack does. He doesn't have any other way to apply Root.
Right. So yeah, if he applies Shock and Root, then he gets a throw on his. So that is very, very powerful. Yeah.
All right, let's move on to the next card, which I believe is going to be Famine.
Yeah. So Famine's like the opposite of War, where War wants to get into your face. A Famine has to end with outside of range 3 of non-dazed enemy characters. So Famine can either completely daze or KO the character that they're going after, or attack and then run away. And then that Vanish into Dust lets them run away. So it's a place itself within range 2 of its current location, and the enemy character gets drained of power, so it's harder to come after Famine. So Famine is kind of playing a denial, stay away role within the squad.
And because it's important to reiterate, and if you've forgotten, all of these powers, when a horseman's on the table, Apocalypse gets to use.
Yeah, so Apocalypse generally uses Vanish into Dust to get closer to things.
Usually.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, because he doesn't have the same sort of Horseman of Famine incentive, and also he's like very, very durable. So just teleport towards them and see what happens. It should be fine.
Then go ahead and give him some conditions from your
so he only gets
pestilence.
To use,
he only gets to use once per round.
Yeah, one of these powers for each of his activations. Yeah, but depending on the situation, he uses Vanish in the Dust quite a bit whenever he has access to it. So it's if you have Famine and you chose a character to put Famine on, then he gets access to that superpower.
Good Lord.
And let's go ahead and take a look at the last Horseman card, which is Death.
Yeah.
Death, unsurprisingly, gives you lots of evolution tokens for murder.
Yeah, for killing things or being dazed or KO'd. Right? So Created to End gives them extra dice against already damaged characters. So Death is built to take out and finish off things on the table. And whenever they do finish off things, you gain evolution tokens. And because there's that waiting game of waiting for a character that's easy prey. Sometimes they get taken out before they get to do that, and if they do get dazed or KO'd, then you still get the evolution tokens because death is very inevitable.
Yeah, like I love the survival of the fittest theme of that, right? Like my Horsemen of Death, what do? They cause death. Great. They can either cause it on other people, or if it happens to them, then great. I don't really care.
Yeah.
I'm still getting my tokens,
right?
Like, I don't know, I love that sort of theme.
And it gives you different characters that are good and in the role, for sure.
Yeah. Let's take a look at, obviously my favorite death target was an injured Wolverine because
beautiful.
There's nothing better than saying, did you want more dice? Here it is.
A whole lot of dice.
But let's go ahead and take a look at a character that I think you can't have Apocalypse without Archangel, who is his ultimate Horseman of Death. And so Archangel here coming alongside with Angel, with Apocalypse. Fun design here as far as like everything goes. It was really neat to play with the differences between Angel and Archangel. The idea that Archangel is just all aggression, all damage, very in your face. And as you'll see if you come to the roadmap on Saturday, you'll get to see the parallel to that with what we did with Angel, who's very different, plays a very different kind of game. But so you can imagine taking this character, adding the death or the war, because I believe those are his two options.
It's Pestilence.
Pestilence. So you can take death or Pestilence.
So like that's playing into like the toxic flechettes. So you can get poison, bleed onto characters. So whenever he's Pestilence, it's much easier to get that poison out. And then with Neurotoxin on Avatar of Death, you can use you can get an activated token on the characters if they have poison and bleed. So
and that's really good with the You'll Be Remade Through Me to get those conditions on there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you can when this guy plays with Apocalypse, there's a ton of synergy.
Yeah. And whenever he is Death, as he's most famously Death, the extra dice from Death combine really well with Chosen of Apocalypse, so that he hits very, very hard.
All right, and I believe we have one shot of all of the cards, just for all those people want to grab a screenshot, be able to share all of the different effects and everything. I know that we talked before about something we were going to say here, but I think we already said it.
No, I want to say one thing.
Go for it.
So, like, taking all four horsemen is like when Apocalypse is going to be the strongest, and you can't do that until you get up to 16 threat is the lowest that you can do for this. To take all four horsemen. So you have a lot of options for what you need to choose and what kind of superpowers you want, and leaving any of these out is painful because you really need to decide what you want Apocalypse to be doing that game.
Yeah, it definitely comes down to, I think there's a really interesting, and to be fair, a very deep mechanic with Apocalypse and how you roster construct around him of, yeah, you can take 16 threat, but you're taking maybe suboptimal characters to give Apocalypse all of the abilities that you want him to have. Additionally, they're getting additional punch from the Servants of Apocalypse and the Horseman cards. But you may be leaving out, say, an Archangel, right? You may be leaving out a Wolverine. You may be leaving out other characters that really shine because of the lower threat. So you have to plan around all of that kind of different stuff.
So some flexibility in that, all of the characters in the affiliation can be one of two horsemen. So whenever you're planning your squad, if you want to take a character, it's usually easy to get them in as one of the two types of horsemen that they can be.
it's a very different list building puzzle
Yes.
from normal Crisis Protocol, right? Because you're not necessarily looking for splash characters because they can't be horsemen. So
Right.
you're really trying to figure out what is the how are you going to put it all together
And
at
you
each of the
assign it
different
right at the
point
beginning
levels.
of the game, so
Yeah.
it's not you're
You
not
get
predetermining.
tons of flexibility in that, but you get not a lot of flexibility in character choice or things like that.
Right.
So this very powerful leadership.
So it kind of goes without saying that Apocalypse is kind of more of an advanced character, right? Like a more complex character, right?
Yeah, that's
if you're
very
starting
true.
off MCP, maybe don't start with Apocalypse, I guess. is
Or
what we're
just
saying.
do it and
Or just
jump
do
in.
it and figure it out. right?
Like,
figure out-
become
there's a lot of
specialist.
depth to
Yeah.
explore with a
I think
There's
the
a
cool
lot.
thing about the cool thing about anything like this, right, is that there's a very low floor. It's just
Right.
here's the list of characters. Take the characters that you think are cool, slap them on, and you can play games and probably see some success. But the more understanding you get for it, the more in depth you get, you start to really get that galaxy brain of unlocking all these different combinations, and then you start looking at the list. And one of the I think the really fun things about the way that the affiliation for Servants of the Apocalypse works is that it's easy to multi-affiliate your roster with, say, if you throw in an X-Men leader or you throw in a Brotherhood leader. Now all of a sudden, like if you're just like it's not the right time to bring out Apocalypse, you can pretty easily pivot to one of those and not really feel like you've missed any of the important choices.
Right.
So there's a lot of potential there, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how players dive into that and how this new mechanic really affects roster construction, turn zero, all of that stuff and that planning. And I think as time goes on, players are just going to get better and more adept at being able to manage what Apocalypse is asking.
Right.
But certainly from the start, right, your best bet is just be like, this looks cool, I'm going to play it and see how it goes and learn your lessons from there.
Right.
Because I don't think anyone's going to sit down and their very first roster is going to be perfect.
Right.
We're
Exactly.
adding 4 superpowers to characters along with a whole leadership that is a tarot-sized card for Apocalypse, in addition to a 6-threat Apocalypse. So it is layering things on top of each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's a lot.
It's going to be a character that is great for people that love to specialize, right?
Right.
Yeah,
And really dig in.
And one of the things I love about that is that is so Apocalypse, right? Like, how do I find the perfect creation, right? How do I find the strongest?
Right.
And you weed it out. And so
Right.
you're going to weed out your rosters. You're going to find what's weak and get rid of it and come back in. And so you as the players, you're constructing these rosters. Like, it naturally leads you into Apocalypse.
Right. Right.
And that's the point of all the games that we make, right? Is to bring the narrative to the player and make it feel like you're actually into this and you're doing this. And that's why we make these guys' lives hell by telling them to do things that they're like, there's no way.
It's fun.
And it's like, you've got 2 years, you'll figure it out.
It's a fun problem.
And they just start working through it.
Break your brain for good.
And then they get their revenge because they get to hand these designs and documents over to the playtesters, and the playtesters go through exactly what they went through, and then they're like, no, but you got to do it, so you got to try it, and then through iterations, the playtesters start to see
it's
the
your
light,
turn.
and they're like, oh, this is amazing, and now here in a month or so, it's going to be out there for all of you to go through the same process, and it's going to be very exciting. The last thing we want to talk about before we end, though, is, of course, as with all the greatest big bads, Marvel Crisis Protocol at its standard level is supposed to be a competitive, balanced experience between 2 players, right? Like, no one is going to be able to put one character on the table and immediately just win because they have the unstoppable force of destruction.
Right.
Just boring, really.
It's not exciting. However, when you come in to a game knowing that you're going up against one of the biggest bads of the Marvel Universe, and you bring a friend along with you, i.e. an Ultimate Encounter, that's the moment where you really get to live out that narrative. And Mr. Ben here, this was his very first project that was handed to him on his little lonesome was create an Ultimate Encounter for Apocalypse.
I went.
And let me tell you, most people when presented that they're pretty conservative and like they don't want to like knock people out of chairs or raise eyebrows. But Ben was just like, oh, I can do anything I want. What about this?
We got treasure chests. We got horsemen. We got all
Chambers.
kinds of powers.
Obelisks.
We got celestial technology. We got evolution. We can talk about it a little bit.
There's zero question. There's zero question overall that it is the biggest, most ridiculous Ultimate Encounter that we have ever done.
Yeah.
Bigger than Dormammu.
It features the Crisis teams coming in. Yeah, it takes Dormammu and says that's child's play. Let's do 3 more things.
Yeah.
But man, does it capture the entire narrative of the X-Men and X-Force have shown up. the clock's about to strike midnight. Apocalypse is going to come out of that sarcophagus, and you have to do everything you can to try to stop him, or otherwise the age of apocalypse is upon us.
Right.
Amazingly, the ultimate encounter gives you everything you want. Ben did a great job of integrating all of the terrain into it. So if you do wind up collecting an entire set of terrain,
you need the rejuvenation chamber and you need Apocalypse to play the ultimate encounter.
Yep.
And then the rejuvenation chamber kit has all tokens you need to set up a full, nearly full service of everything you need to play the ultimate encounter. All of the, but you can replace those tokens with the terrain elements that we have in the other kits.
And so then you can really just see it on the table and all its glory. It's very cool in the way in which it works. So it gives you options, like if you do wind up collecting an entire Age of Apocalypse table, like you get to use it in this fantastic fashion. And as Ben mentioned, we're going to give a little preview of the gameplay here, but there'll be more to come as we move forward. But he does evolve. And
he does evolve.
So talk a little bit about the evolution mechanic in this and how it works.
So yeah, the first 2 rounds of the game, you're determining how much Apocalypse is going to evolve before he comes out. So generally the game is the Crisis teams are trying to break all of Apocalypse's stuff, all the celestial technologies on the board.
Just got a golf club and go in hand.
And the Horsemen are trying to defend that stuff and do their Horseman powers that generate evolution. So the celestial technology all generates evolution tokens, and the Horsemen generate evolution for doing their particular things that they're specialized in, war and death. And then those celestial technologies also help the Horsemen. They also have individual rules for things they do. They have
movement,
healing,
power,
and
healing, all sorts
movement,
of stuff. Yeah.
teleportation. That the celestial technology is very powerful. So getting rid of the right things is what you're trying to do. You also, as the Crisis team, have the ability to go get some treasure chests that give you additional powers.
Why wouldn't you
sick loot?
And why wouldn't you get some celestial technology too?
Yeah, which I heavily recommend going for the treasure chest. There's some sick stuff in there. So yeah, you get those things. And over those first 2 rounds, you kind of determine how much evolution. There's a track. How much evolution Apocalypse has done in that time. How much have the machines worked on them.
How much goop has been collected.
That's right.
How much goop has been collected. So if very minimal goop, we're at the first evolution. Basically, if the Horsemen have failed, we're at the first evolution. And if the Crisis team have essentially failed, like they haven't broken anything, then and the Horsemen are doing all of their Horseman abilities, then we get to the 4th evolution. And the 4th evolution, so the difference here is insane. So the first evolution is, that is...
it's a pretty reasonable character,
It's
I
a
think,
pretty
right?
reasonable
He's strong,
character, but
not
the
wild.
Crisis teams are going to be able to take him out pretty reliably. And then the 4th evolution is the most powerful character in MCP that has ever existed. He has free superpowers. He does area 3 attacks. He's a god that brings about the Age of Apocalypse, right? So those are the stakes.
And then you get 2 more in the middle.
There's a couple of in-betweeners.
Yeah, so those second and third evolutions is generally where we expect most games to go, and we get to see, and you get to fight it out, and so that is it's very tight to get from that second to third evolution, and whenever he gets to that third evolution, it's very, very fun, hard encounter at that point. And then if you get them down to the second evolution, then you're able to, still pretty tight, but you're not gritting your teeth quite as much as the Crisis teams.
I remember we had a very long discussion about the 4th evolution, and we were like, well, should the game just end, and there shouldn't be a 4th evolution because you've lost? We're like, no, you need to see what happens.
You need to see what you've lost.
And I think we can do that in Ultimate Encounters because it's significantly less about having particularly balanced experiences or anything like that, and much more about telling the story and having this narrative thing. So
it's pretty trivial for him to get a 20 die in Summoner's Judgment. If you brought a character for like a Hulk or something, watch out.
Bye. But yeah, getting to see sort of our interpretation of what happened to bring about the Age of Apocalypse, I think is very cool and something that you can experience in the Ultimate Encounter. So that was a very important thing that we figured out in playtest. It was like, no, we need this 4th evolution.
Well, and there's always that moment where you see the 4th evolution come out and you're like, I think we can take him.
Sure,
You're just like,
it's
going to be a lot. I think we can take him. and then you do a little damage to him, and maybe he boffs a roll, and you're like, yes, it's working, and then all of a sudden it swings back, and you're just like, no, it didn't work out at all. And then the Apocalypse players would be like, I am Apocalypse, all cower before me, and you get to smash things. And it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's
really,
amazing
really
is what
fun.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us for this panel. That kind of wraps up everything we have for you. I hope you are excited as we are, having worked on this character for so long. Now, finally, to have him entering the fray of Marvel Crisis Protocol, whether you plan to use him as an ultimate encounter to play with your friends, or you plan to bring the Servants of Apocalypse affiliation into your games and take him to events and all of that other stuff, and just have fun telling your stories with this amazing character. It's always a blast to be able to bring these icons to the game. And to see all of the work hit the tables and to watch all of you out there enjoy it, fret about it, master it, and unlock all of its potential. So thank you so much for everyone for joining us. If you stick around, don't leave, because we're not done with Apocalypse. Dallas painted some terrain before. We talked about Apocalypse now. Dallas is going to paint the one and only Mr. Apocalypse on the next stream. So stick with us. Be sure to tune in for that and see how to get En Sabanur painted up and ready for the tabletop. Thank you so much.
It's a lot of blue.
It is a lot of blue.